This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
Coming up on this week's programme, the third fire in a bus in almost as many months galvanised the Transport Ministry this last week to remove school buses from circulation, leaving thousands of children stranded.
Roughly, we're talking about 6,000 school children who are missing school right now or being late getting to school.
And we join the Peace March in Nicosia, the biggest demonstration yet in support of Palestine and calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. There was consternation earlier this week when it was discovered that several school buses had been taken out of commission following some fires that had happened over the last several months. It means that while the buses are checked, there will be no school buses. We're joined by our Transport Minister Alexis Vafiadis to explain what's going on. Alexis, worst time of year as people are getting ready for the school plays and the end of term and so on and so forth. But let's start with how these fires started. There's 3, I think, we've had now in the buses?
Yeah, we've had 3 fires this year. One in the port of Limassol, one in Yenapa, and the last one in Naglanja last Friday. Now, there is no official document which says why these fires occurred. I think it's going to be some time before we have it. So we actually decided not to wait for the official statement on why the fires happened. We decided we had to act immediately because last Monday, more buses would be taking children to school, so we had to take all measures necessary to safeguard that they would never have to go through the same experience again.
Fortunately, there have been no injuries and everybody's fine. But surely it's not difficult for the bus companies to take the buses that have had fires to the garage to say, tell me what happened. Usually it's an electrical fault or something. That's easy to discover, isn't it?
Yeah, it is easy, but actually, the authority in charge of all investigations at this time is the police. And the police will invite specialists on various issues if they need any clarifications for that. This is not a process that will end soon. We expect it to take some time. So, unfortunately, we had to act without any knowledge about why the fire actually happened. There are theories about why the fire happened. And as you, I think, correctly pointed out, it's either electrical or a fuel issue. But nevertheless, we had to tackle 2 issues immediately. One was certainty as to whether the vehicles were serviced as per the manufacturer's instructions. And we required that relevant documentation was submitted to us, signed and by authorized engineers who would actually be held responsible if that was not the case, because only if a vehicle is serviced properly and there's preventive maintenance happening are we sure that the vehicle is in the right condition to be on the road.
Well, roadworthy. I mean,
yes.
They all have MOTs as well, don't they?
Yes, they do have MOTs. We have asked them to do an MOT at least 3 months before the new school year started, and that did happen. But the MOT will cover certain issues of the car. I mean, they will check tires, they will check brakes, they will check suspension and emissions, but they will not go into further detail. They will not go into firefighting issues or electrical issues or generator issues. They will not check that.
Okay, but there are systems available that if a fire does erupt in a bus, for example, it should have an automatic extinguishing system, shouldn't it?
Well, that's exactly the whole discussion runs around that issue. Now, the law says, which is a European Union regulation, says that any buses registered for the first time after 2021 need to have a firefighting system, a fire extinguishing system. All the buses on the streets registered after 2021 do have that, and these are the buses we see in the streets right now.
All right, but how many buses on the roads were registered before and don't comply with those regulations?
So, approximately 570 buses were registered before 2021 and do not have this equipment on. So, the agreement signed between the government and the companies which do run public transport services says two things. It says that they should comply with the law and the regulations, but they should also carry firefighting equipment. So we had this first fire, I think it was July, the port of Limassol. We all treated that as an accident. It was an accident. Then we had another fire in the beginning of October, and we said, okay, what's going on here? This is not something we were expecting to have so soon after the first fire. So we sent a letter to all the bus companies instructing them to install firefighting equipment if they didn't have it.
Even on the older buses?
Even on the old buses, because all the new ones have it. Mm-hmm. So the old buses, whoever didn't have it, had the obligation to install it. So on Friday, when we had the third occurrence, and we did check whether they did install firefighting equipment in all the buses, we realized that they had done nothing about it. So they did not act on our instruction issued on the 11th of October.
Sorry, but actually, couldn't somebody from the ministry have followed up after that instruction and said, you have 1 week to do this, or 2 weeks to do this, and we're going to come and check? I mean, that would be the logical way, because we know people try and get away with things.
Yeah, but I think that giving them some time to make sure that they do install this and they find it from abroad, there's no such equipment in Cyprus, so they would need to import it. In my mind, giving them a month and something would be okay. That would be okay because the law did not require it, the agreement required it, the law didn't require it. So we gave them the time, they did nothing. So once we had the third occurrence, we decided that we could not take the risk for a fourth occurrence without this equipment. And that was the reason why we decided to ground all the buses without the firefighting equipment on. But for us, even more important than the firefighting system is certification that the buses have been maintained properly.
Yeah, some of them are very old and I think were bought second-hand, weren't they?
Yeah, the law does not restrict second-hand buses. There is a regulation that says their age should be less than 20 years old. So any bus that was put into operation 20 years ago can do public transport services. So the rule is 20 years.
And then after 20 years, that's it, off the road?
They can do whatever they want, but they cannot be involved in public transport.
And when you say public transport, does that mean that they can be hired out privately as well?
Yes, they can.
Well, is that not a problem as well?
Well,
I mean, you're in a sense determining who is eligible to go on a bus that might catch fire. You've avoided school children, but actually, if these things are still in service, you and I could get on a bus that happens to be 20 years old, and it could catch fire.
Yeah, any bus can catch a fire. Okay. Now, the thing is, the law is very clear in determining what can do this service or not. So the law clearly allows all these buses to be on the road and to provide the service. It does not disqualify them from the service. So since the law allows it, we are not the ones to determine whether they can do it or not.
Does the law need changing?
Well, that's one of the issues we do need to address in the near future. But right now, what we are doing is that we are interpreting the agreement the government has with these companies, which clearly says they should have this equipment on board. So based on that, we acted, not based on the law. So what you see now is this oxymoron happening right now, where if a private entity decides to go on a trip, let's say, they can choose these buses for their trip. It all depends on the risk they are willing to take. The government has decided that all public transport cannot be done considering this risk. So they included this term, this obligation, in the agreement. That's why they did that.
Okay, but what checks are there on the bus companies? I mean, do you check that they've rented out 13 buses in the last 4 months and all 13 were over 20 years old without this equipment? Are they only renting privately the ones that you're not allowing on the road as public transport. That's my point. But again, we're still talking about potential hazard to passengers.
Yes, well, we need to clarify that the reason the law does not prohibit them from providing the service is because adding the firefighting equipment is actually an upgrade on safety. It's an upgrade. That's why they did not disqualify all the other buses. It doesn't mean that the other buses are not safe. It just means that they don't have this equipment on board. And that's why the law allows them to provide the service. Now, I think it's not up to the government to decide whether they should stop from providing the service, because then when do you draw the line? That's the law, one thing. The other thing would be, this is 2023. If all the buses after 2021, registered after 2021, need to have this equipment, well, it's a big step if we decide to disqualify all buses before 2021. You understand what I mean? So,
well, you're not, but you could disqualify them until they've got that equipment on board.
Well, practically that's what we're doing, because all the buses on the streets provide the service to the government through these companies, and this will enforce all these buses to have firefighting equipment. So they will be installing these at some point or another. I think it's going to be all of them right now. They will be doing it. And I think that awareness of this issue will create pressure on all other buses which do not have it to install it, because we're not talking about a lot of money.
We're talking about trust here as well, aren't we?
Yes, of course.
You've been pushing for people to get on the buses, and when we have incidents like this, a lot of people say, I'm not sure I want to do that.
Exactly. I think it's all about trust that throughout the event. I think that if we cannot persuade the people to trust the service, then they will not be using it. Then there are two drawbacks about that. One, they will not benefit from the service. And two, as a society, we will not be able to use the bus transport system as a means of allowing people to get from point A to point B. So I think it's a social issue, and it's also a personal issue. I mean, if you just see how many children are staying home these days.
I was going to come back and say to you, have you been able to quantify how this has affected how many school children? Because some of them who live in remote areas have no way of getting to school if there's no bus.
Yeah.
Okay, others, their parents probably jump in a car and take them, and others, though, may have to stay home. And are we going to do distance learning again for them? Until when?
Yeah, well, roughly we're talking about 6,000 school children who are missing school right now, or being late getting to school. Now, we did give instructions to the bus companies to give priority to all mountain areas, and wherever they know that people do not have access to a private car, they should give them priority. I know we are getting complaints from certain villages that they are not having a bus service, so we are looking into that and seeing how this can be facilitated. But we are talking about 6,000 children. It's a lot. Our Minister for Education did say that she is considering distance learning too, so that they don't miss out on lessons. We are reaching the end of the year, and they do have exams and all that stuff, and they do have their plays, as you said. So I think we are trying to minimize the negative impact from this decision, but at the end of the day, we had to choose whether we prioritize safety or attendance at school, and that was a clear choice, actually. We did decide to make sure that there would be no other such event, because 3 times lucky, you don't know what's the fourth going to bring with it.
Yeah. Well, we've got the school holiday coming up, and so I guess that the pressure's off slightly, isn't it, for you, until when the schools go back, what's that, sometime after the 6th of January? Will the buses be back in service by then?
Well, actually, we still have 3 weeks of school, 3 weeks minus 2 days. So,
but you can't do much about it in that time,
We are trying to. Actually, I'm waiting for a report from the staff here at the ministry regarding 4 different submissions done by the bus companies regarding equipment they could use. Now, we have appointed a committee consisting of 3 experts on cars and electrical appliances and stuff like that. So they are looking into the specifications, and they will be coming back to us with approval or not of what was submitted by the bus company. So if, for example, they approve a system that is not pressurized, then that can be flown over, and we may have that within the next 2 or 3 days. And if they work on over the weekend to install them in buses, we could have, best case scenario, buses back on the streets on Monday. That's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is having to bring them by ship. I think that will take an additional week, so we're talking about not this Monday, the Monday after that. And the worst case scenario is that we need to wait for these products to be manufactured, and then that will be beginning of January. But I really hope that it's the best case scenario, and that we will have good news, and hopefully buses back on the streets by Monday. Now, we do have 29 buses which are sidelined actually at the moment, but they do have firefighting equipment. We just need to be assured that it's in operational condition. And once we do get that, we will be allowing them to run the service. So we will have another 29 buses. 29 buses at this time, if we're talking about 50 students per...
It's nowhere near the 6,000.
Yes, but it's a start. We're talking about close to 1,500 students. So at least it's going to be 1,500 less. The Intercity Bus Company is actually introducing, I think, 20 new buses on the highways either tomorrow or the day after. They are receiving another 11 new buses on Thursday. They will be registered as a priority and allowed to join their service on Monday. So I think as we go along, we will be improving things. Perhaps not in one go across the service, but it's going to be piece by piece and trying to improve the bus service.
Very quick last question. Electric buses, we mentioned it before, and I think you've got a couple in service now, haven't you?
We do, yeah, we do. We have 5 in Nicosia, I think, or 5 in Nicosia and Larnaca, the big buses. And Limassol has a lot more smaller buses, and I think they have 3 sizes in Limassol, and they're 12 meters, 9 meters, and the smaller ones. I think they have all the smaller ones, 35 electric small buses, and they have a number for the bigger buses as well. So this is something we will be seeing in the streets. Unfortunately, not all of them. It was not a requirement by the agreement, and we will have to live with that.
That is our Transport Minister, Alexis Vafiadis. Many thanks for your time.
Thank you.
This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
The biggest achievement of Crime Stoppers has been the ability of the public to be able to give information about crime anonymously.
There's no way I could have kept prostituting without the drugs. There's no way I could have had my body used like a public toilet, because that's actually what prostitution is.
And then the 4th series I started 3 days after I'd won the Oscar, so the whole of the Monarch of the Glen experience was all interplatted with the Gosford Park Oscar experience.
I was working with Ronnie James Dio, and David was going to reform Whitesnake in 2003.
Cyprus was chosen because Cyprus is a stable, peaceful and secure place.
We have to really look closely. What are we doing with children? What are we doing with adolescents? And what are we doing with adults that can help them move into a more literate situation?
The ones that I'm proudest of are the ones that were true discoveries, where we found something we didn't know existed.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
A Pan-Cyprian peace march was held last Sunday in central Nicosia. Before the march started, the Palestinian ambassador to Cyprus gave a short speech. He said, "On behalf of all the Palestinian people, I bring you greetings, mainly from the children of Gaza. From under the rubble, you will allow me to thank on behalf of us all, the children of Gaza, because with their blood they have helped the masks to fall, and we see the truth. They helped us to distinguish our real friends from those who are hypocrites. They helped us to find our way. This is the Cyprus we love. This is the Cyprus we want. We want the Cypriot people to be by our side always." supporters then began to line up ready for the march. At the front were two women dressed in white gowns spattered with blood. One was blindfolded and the other carried an olive branch. Perhaps they were representing angels, but the olive branch, of course, is a symbol of peace, but also of the importance of the olive tree to the Palestinian people. Many of them rely on the olive harvest for their income, but Israeli settlers, particularly in the West Bank, regularly chop down olive orchards belonging to Palestinians. Behind the women were four people carrying bundles representing dead babies. So far, more than 7,000 children have been killed in Gaza since Israel's bombardment began. They were followed by protesters holding the flags of Palestine and Cyprus, confirming the solidarity of Cypriots with the Palestinians. Next, lines of demonstrators holding letters that spelt out the word peace, in Greek, then in Turkish, and then in English. The main body of marchers, many waving flags and chanting "Free, Free Palestine" and "Cyprus-Palestine Solidarity" and "No to War" and "No Justice, No Peace." Long live Palestine. And among the marchers were several politicians and many non-governmental organizations. As the marchers filed out of Eleftheria Square, it was hard to estimate the numbers, but this was certainly one of the biggest protests seen in the capital for many years.
Των υπεριαλιστών, ζήτω η φιλία των λαών. No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace. Viva, viva, viva Palestina. Viva, viva, viva Palestina. Viva, viva Palestina.
Placards read, "If you're silent, you're complicit." And as another group approached, the chants turned to English. Stop the genocide. Ceasefire now. And what's become a favourite here, Nikos, Nikos, you can't hide, you're supporting genocide. Many Cypriots are aghast at their president's support for Israeli actions in Gaza. The police brought up the rear as the last marchers exited Eleftheria Square, while the front of the demonstration was already heading towards the Israeli embassy, although they weren't allowed anywhere near it. They passed Europe House, the offices of the European Commission and European Parliament before they headed for the US Embassy across town. It was 5 p.m. by the time they started back to central Nicosia, where a concert was to take place. It was getting dark, but almost all the protesters were still there, waving their banners and chanting, after walking peacefully but noisily for over an hour and a half. There was a distinct chill in the air as darkness fell, but it didn't appear to dampen the spirit of the protesters or to detract from the message they wanted to give. Not just to Israel, but to all the governments of the West who are condoning the genocide in Palestine. Some marchers affixed posters to the lampposts as they moved along, sponsored by the Pan-Cyprian Peace March and reading, "With Palestine until freedom."
Weeks ago, I was
It was close to 6 o'clock by the time the last marchers headed back to the concert in central Nicosia, where a lot of them spent the rest of the evening. Well, I hope that report gave you a flavour of last Sunday's demonstration in Nicosia. It certainly was the biggest that I have ever seen, but if you'd like to see it with the pictures, then please look on my YouTube channel, Rosie Haralambous.
You can subscribe to the Cyprus News Digest on iTunes for free and get the program downloaded to your phone or tablet so you can listen anytime, anywhere.
And in other news this week, well, it's a poor showing by Cypriot students, apparently, in the Programme for International Student Assessment, or PISA. The survey for 15-year-olds in mathematics, reading and science showed that the performance of Cypriot students were very disappointing. They were drastically lower than the averages scored by children in the rest of the European Union, and there was also a marked difference between the scores of children from different socio-economic backgrounds. Reacting to these results, the Education Ministry said that it's implementing new short-term, medium-term and long-term policies, although we haven't been able to get them to tell us what those are. They say they're going to be placing more emphasis on critical thinking, creativity, and the development of pupils' skills. They also said they plan to integrate modern technologies into the education system to ensure a better connection to the labour market. And there's bad news too on the domestic violence front. The police have investigated nearly 500 cases of domestic violence and made 93 arrests during the months of September and October. This was according to statistics released earlier this week. The Association for the Prevention and Handling of Violence in the Family said that the data shows there's been an increase of reports of incidents of domestic violence over the last 4 years. In 2019, there were 1,384 incidents, which rose to 2,147 in 2020, and then to 2,854 the following year. In 2022, the number shot up to 3,122, while from the beginning of 2023 until October, 2,550 were recorded. The same data says that 90% of the perpetrators are Cypriots, and in 80% of cases a child had witnessed the violence. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.